like Dan Quinn says, anytime, any place, anywhere. you get this team into the playoffs, I'm going to be happy to talk till I have nothing left to give.
Mitchell was down there in Tampa, of course, and now is with us here on the Hoffman Show. Mitchell, still basking in the glory, and did they let you on the pirate ship second time around this season?
You know what? They didn't let me on the pirate ship the first time around, and quite frankly, I'm happy that we're never going to have to hear those dang cannons again, because those things are quite annoying, to say the least. But basking in the win is a good way to put it. Maybe trying to recover from the win is a second way of putting it. But by Saturday night, man, I can't wait for what this place is going to look like, what Lions Stadium is going to look like, and what the Commanders team is going to look like.
So the atmosphere in Tampa, definitely electric, but there was a ton of Commanders fans. I don't think that will be the case in Detroit on Saturday night. As someone who goes to every game, like, what's the toughest environment you think that they have played in so far this year, and how prepared do you think they are for, pun intended, the Lions' Den?
I very much appreciate the pun. What's the toughest environment they played in this year? Probably the Monday night game against the Bengals. I mean, that was a wounded franchise, a wounded team that was trying to get back, and obviously prime time has been quite a difficult place for old school Washington teams of yore. But I think that was the toughest one. But quite frankly, having a quarterback like Jayden Daniels, I think almost makes you environment proof, if you will. You know, Ford Field is incredibly loud, and we were blast there in 22 for the game, and JP Finley and I sat next to each other in the press box, and by the end of the game, my voice sounded like it does today, because you have to yell at each other next to each other to hear it. However, when you look at Jayden Daniels and his history and all the big games and big environments that he played in college, there's nothing that the NFL is going to throw at him that he hasn't already seen before. Bama, LSU, Saturday night, in Tuscaloosa. There's few environments in any sport that would match that. And so when you talk about kind of the environment and the noise being an issue, certainly it's something that you need to contend with. But when you have a guy who's kind of been there, done that, particularly when it's the quarterback, because on the offensive side is really where that usually manifests itself. I think that you can dismiss it as a little bit less of an overall issue.
Mitch Tischler, co-host of the Beltway Football Podcast, with us here on the Hoffman Show. And Mitchell, for me, sitting on the outside, this is the ultimate house money game. Like, they've won a playoff game, they've broken that streak. They're already so far beyond the expectations that anybody reasonably had for them. And I typically hate they got nothing to lose. They got the same thing in front of them as the Lions, theoretically. Like, they got the same opponents potentially on the way to the Super Bowl. Of course, Washington will have to do it all on the road. Detroit would be able to do it at home. But we know that's not how human psychology works. Like, emotionally, the Lions are the favorite here. But do you think that there's any leaning into that in Ashburn, in that locker room? Or is everyone kind of on the page that Dan Quinn said that they were on last week? And maybe it's different this week versus last week. The Bucs, who they had already gone toe-to-toe with this year and felt very much like they could beat in this newer, better version of themselves, versus a Lions team that's been the best team in the sport this year. But, do they kind of look at this as house money, playing free, whatever, or do they put the pressure on themselves of no, we belong here, and is that how they kind of tackle the psychology of playing in this game?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's the pressure of it necessarily, but there's a lot of different sayings that Dan Quinn has, and they use them in different ways. And one of the ones we've seen all year has been any time, any place, anyone. And something that they had up on the big board today was they have to go through us. And I just thought that was a really good kind of mental space for them to be in. The Lions are on paper the better team, but once you get to the playoffs and you end up in this situation, I think you need to stop playing this, underdog attitude and be confident in who you are. And I think that's what you're seeing out of Dan Quinn. He's instilling this, we belong here. This isn't just by chance. You guys worked your butts off to get to this point, and quite frankly, it's on them to beat us, not us to beat them. And I really like that attitude. And kind of one place where I see that, that sort of attitude can kind of help, buoy this team is just flat first quarter stats. The Commanders are third in the NFL in points in the first quarter. Detroit is middle of the NFL. They're 13th. If you're able to get out ahead of this team and you force Jared Goff, put a little pressure on him, have to throw the ball a lot, let that D-line pin back their ears a little bit. There are very direct game scripts where you can look at this as, okay, if Washington does A, B, and C, they're going to win this football game. And despite being 9.5, 10-point underdogs, whatever, the folks in the desert have them pegged at, Jayden Daniels, to me, is the best quarterback in the NFC that is left. And as we know, this is a quarterback league, and anytime you got JD5 on the field, you have a chance to win.
No, I love that. It's one thing for, pundits. I remember one of the first segments we ever did on the show because someone said something that got under my skin, and I was like, I'm nipping this in the bud now. And I was like, there's a difference in punditry and participation. Well, the attitude I have as a pundit, as someone who has no control over the outcome, is very different than the attitude that I want the participants to have if I have a rooting interest. And as a pundit, someone sitting outside, it's like, yeah, of course they're playing with house money. Whatever happens, like, I will deem this season a success. For them on the inside to have that mentality of they have to go through us is awesome. Like, that's one that any coach should stick in their back pocket if they ever get in this situation. As for the actual on-the-field element of it, though, beyond the psychology, there's no doubt the best defense for Washington this week is to do exactly what they did against Tampa and control the ball, dominate time of possession, just not let this Detroit offense that's super potent on the field. How confident are you that they can do that again, whether it is the same way without a running game or that they can get the running game going against a Detroit defense that's not as good as Tampa is up the middle?
Yeah, I think, first of all, you have to look at some of those Detroit defensive stats and recognize that early on in games all season long, they have gotten up by double digits by the middle of the second quarter and forced teams to get into a negative game script. So their run defensive numbers are going to look very, very good. Also, obviously, Aiden Hutchinson, one of the best defensive ends, pass rushers in the NFL, not just pass rushers, but defensive ends, isn't there anymore. I do think that the run game should have an opportunity to be a little bit more successful, but ultimately, I think you're going to be looking at two coaches that are both going to be coaching in very similar ways. Both teams are very aggressive on fourth down. Both teams really like to control the ball, control time of possession, but do so in a relatively unconventional way. And I think as you look at, the way that Washington wants to control the ball, they should be able to act very similarly to the way they did in Tampa. And honestly, from a defensive perspective, I like the idea of a team going for fourth down on it, fairly often with me, especially with a immobile quarterback who's not going to really give you a dual threat option. I think that gives you a chance to get the ball in plus territory, multiple times a game, and it doesn't have to get every stop on fourth down, but one or two big stops, and that's going to turn the tide of this football game.
It definitely could. And something else that I thought was interesting from the Tampa game that I wonder how this carries over against Detroit is while the Commanders gave up some drives, they often got things to 3rd and long. And unfortunately, they gave up a couple of those. The most notable being that 3rd and 9 Baker Mayfield scramble at the end of the first half that turns into a touchdown drive. And you're like, God, they barely had the ball in the second quarter, and now we're sitting here tied at halftime. That's annoying. All you need to do is get a stop, and you get the ball to start the second half. But there's a lot of 3rd and 9s in the game. There's 3rd and 9, 3rd and 7. Like, there's a lot of that. And for Dan Quinn or Dan Campbell, who are ultra aggressive going for it on fourth down, nobody more so than Campbell, he's not going to go for it at his own 35 if it's 4th and 9. If it's 4th and 2, he might. But I think that is something where Washington's defense at times this year has been really good at, we'll give up a couple of first downs within a drive, but then we ultimately do get the sack or the tackle for loss or something that's a negative play or a stuff type of play that does create a insert late down, third or fourth and long. And if they can just do that, then they stem some of the aggressiveness from Campbell. And Bowles just, I don't think he would have gone for it anyway. That's not who Todd Bowles is, and that's one of the complaints they have in Tampa. But it did limit his opportunities to do the thing that Dan Quinn did, which was go for it on a 4th and 5 or shorter 5 times in the game.
Right. And I think, as you talk about some of those negative plays, I think you have to look a lot in the run game for some of those negative plays. And I know Jahmyr Gibbs is this explosive running back who's extremely difficult to take down. But if you can, he has shown himself to be vulnerable to being strung out to the outside and not quite to continue kind of going east to west instead of north to south. And one of the things that I liked that I saw last week one of the adjustments they made with Bucky Irving was putting Daron Payne or John Allen in those defensive end positions and having a little bit of a bigger body to kind of set that edge. And I think that's something that they can use as a point of emphasis to keep kind of stringing out those runs and allow their linebackers and their safeties to get up on them. Quite frankly, I worry about the passing game. I think, kind of across the board between Jahmyr Gibbs, Laporta, Jameson Williams, I think is going to be a real problem downfield for these guys. And obviously, Amon-Ra St. Brown is just a tactician as a route runner. I think the negative plays in the passing game are going to be kind of few and far between, but I do like kind of putting that ball in Jared Goff's hands and not letting him just turn around and hand it off and letting the ground game control things.
So what was said at post game about Marshawn Lattimore? Mitch Tischler is with us, co-host of the Beltway Football Podcast. Of course, he was in Tampa. He's at every single game. You can listen to him and JP Finley on the Beltway Football Podcast multiple times a week on demand wherever you get your pods. And he's with us every Tuesday during the season here on the Hoffman Show. For the Lattimore part of it, I think this week is interesting because Williams and St. Brown are equally dangerous in very different ways, and how you deploy Lattimore is an interesting choice. The choice to play man coverage period this week could be a very interesting choice. But what was said after the game about the day that Marshawn had with the penalties, with the catches given up to Mike Evans, where he clearly did not look like his dominant self, but that's on some level, I guess, to be expected coming off as long of a layoff as he had.
Yeah, I mean, listen, it would be silly for the Bucs to not challenge a corner, any corner, forget the history, forget the names, who has missed most of the season with, hamstring injuries and is getting out there for just a second time in whatever it's been, 7 weeks. So I think that's kind of going to be a theme as we go through this. And I know that folks want to call him a lemon and think that, he's automatically a bad trade. Like, the dude's been fighting an injury, hasn't been on the field much. I think that some struggles should be expected, though obviously you hope not. Post-game, I got to be honest, the Marshawn Lattimore storyline didn't really pop for me. There wasn't a lot of conversation about, the fact that he didn't have as good of a day. One thing that I would point out from it and that I like, we talked about it with like Adam Peters when he drafted Trey Lance in San Fran, and that didn't work out, and they were able to kind of work their way, get away from it before it, before it was detrimental to the team as a whole. I liked what you saw from Joe Witt, where clearly it wasn't working out. They pulled him out. He turned out to not be an every down corner, and they kind of worked him in, with the other guys. And I think that's an important part of what has made this coaching staff successful, is that they're able to identify the guys that can help them immediately, the guys that can help them midterm and long term, and they don't put too much pressure on anyone to step in and be, the one solo savior on either side of the ball.
I think that's a great point. St. Jude's played a lot in that second half, and especially once they got down in the red zone the second time, in part because I think some of the communications and things that maybe Lattimore wasn't as fresh on. Your red zone coverages are a little bit different. Like, let's get a guy in here that's not going to mess up from a communication standpoint. And, Juice did a good enough job. Obviously, there's some other issues in the secondary, but that's because playing secondary in the NFL is really hard. On the offensive side of the ball, last thing for you, Mitch. Detroit is ultra aggressive defensively. That is who they've been. Dan Campbell has probably my favorite quote of any coach this season. In one of his locker room speeches, he just goes, "It doesn't matter who puts on our uniform. Like, we don't change who we are." And that, I was like, that should not be the case, but it is. Like, they are fast, they are physical, they fly around. We know that they are understaffed though because of all these injuries. But with kind of their current state of their roster and how much man they play, how aggressive they are, does Washington try to counterpunch with some big swings, being more explosive and push the ball down the field? Or do you think that they have to fight that temptation and stay patient and kind of matriculate the ball the way that they did against Tampa, where they had 5, 10-plus play drives and were able to control the ball like we talked about a little earlier?
A big part that's been missing in this offense that was super successful earlier in the season was kind of the short passing game to running backs. And I think a lot of that comes from Austin Eckler missing the 4 games with the concussion, and he had obviously the concussion earlier in the season. We saw it a little bit last week in Tampa. I think they also used that screen game to De'Ami Brown extremely well, and it's interesting to see De'Ami kind of be successful in that kind of role, because kind of the knock on him early in his career was that he shied away from contact a little bit. But I think with the aggressiveness that you're going to see out of Detroit, particularly the fact that they're going to be playing man a lot, I look for a lot of those screen passes, whether they're out to wide receivers or kind of quick little dump offs to running backs, to be a big part of what can make them successful. Now, the Lions getting back Alex Anzalone in the middle of their defense is tough for Washington, because that guy is really good in those situations. But ultimately, with the pressures that they're going to bring, I think a lot of football teams get caught up with Jayden being a rookie quarterback and want to try and hit him with these exotic blitzes and odd views and looks and different things. And that's something that Jayden has shown to be very, very good at diagnosing and then taking advantage of. And so while I expect the Lions to bring some different looks his way, I think he has a real opportunity to hit some of those screens either to the outside or in the middle of the field.
Mitch Tischler with us here on the Hoffman Show. You can catch the Beltway Football Podcast multiple times per week on demand, plus post-game live. They'll be in Detroit on the Monumental Sports app after the game on Saturday night. And then, Mitchell, we will talk to you next Tuesday. Recover, my friend. How happy are you about this being a Saturday game, considering what your voice sounds like on a Tuesday right now? Getting that Sunday to hopefully relax a little bit.
You know what? Like Dan Quinn says, anytime, any place, anywhere. you get this team into the playoffs, I'm going to be happy to talk till I have nothing left to give.
And hey, well, let's shut it down now, since you have more to give to the pod and to anyone else who wants to talk to you. We appreciate your service here to the Hoffman Show, my friend.
Let's hope we're yelling holy potatoes at the end of the night on Saturday.
Indeed, holy potatoes to you and to all. Thanks, Mitchell. I'll see you.